For those of you who may not know me, I'm a professor here at Seoul National University, and my research is in science education, but specifically I focus on intersections of inequity. So I look at issues of gender and race and language and ability, a variety of different factors that can prevent teachers and students from participating in science, or that can prevent researchers from participating in the production of science education knowledge. And so that's what my talk is about today. So I will share my screen. I hope my slides aren't too busy. Let's see. I'm really into bright colors these days. I seem to have auto dictate on, so that can be helpful for some people, but sometimes it's capturing the wrong words. So please excuse me if something terrible pops up in the closed caption. So a critical examination of publishing trends in science education research. So I'm going to be talking some about what we're seeing in publishing in general, and then in science education research specifically, and using that to discuss what are some of the implications for language use and practice in this global science education community that we find ourselves as researchers. And so we first might think about, so why are we publishing? So ideally, science education researchers and researchers in general are publishing so that we can share our findings and our discoveries with our community. But realistically, and especially more and more over the last 2 decades, researchers are being pushed to publish to be competitive for grant funding, to gain and maintain employment, to be promoted, and more doctoral students and graduate students are required to publish in certain journals in order to meet the needs of their program requirements. And the trends in publishing, in journal publishing, have really been dynamic over the last 2 decades. In 2021, there were more than 48,000 scholarly peer-reviewed English language journals, just journals, and more than 13,000 non-English language journals. That's nearly double from only 2014. This is how quickly the market is changing. In 2014, collectively, all the journals published about 2.1 million articles. And this past year, there were 4.5 million articles published. So as the number of articles are published and the number of new journals are established, it's continuing to grow. It makes it more and more difficult to share your research in a sort of channel that might recognize your work in your community. Some communities are dominating the output more than others. Researchers in the United States, for example, and China are 1 and 2 in the world for the number of papers published. And we're seeing a lot of development in other countries. And part of this pressure comes from the pressure for institutes, universities, and research institutes to be ranked. They are competitive for students around the world, and these ranking systems calculate research, and especially citations, research impact, as a huge part of the criteria for determining the rank of a university. And so this has become more important, not just for individual researchers, but for institutes. And researchers in Asia are increasingly becoming more competitive. Here at Seoul National University, we have been increasing in the university ranks in the top 50, and a large part of that has come from investing money, from recruiting international students and family, but really essentially from having faculty and graduate students who produce publications in top journals. And it has to be ranked journals because these are the citations that are deemed important in these criteria for calculating the university rankings. And so this puts a lot of pressure on universities and their faculty and students to be productive. So when we think about this as the background for this small community of science education researchers in a local context and in the global context, we can begin to ask some questions about what does it mean to be engaged in research in a global context. So for example, Dr. Wilms, who's joining us from Luxembourg today, is also a science educator. She and I meet at conferences in different places around the world. We have participated in peer review of different articles that are being published in journals, both ourselves and others. And we have networks from working in different committees to try and promote science education. So some of what it means to be a part of a global community is to be able to participate in it and to participate in it centrally, to have some sense of community and some agency within that community. Now, some of the questions that are of interest to me is how does and how should research from local contexts inform our understandings about teaching and learning in global contexts? So how does what I learn in Korea and how does what Sarah learns in Luxembourg inform our local work through our research channels as we share the work that we produce, and in our global capacity, sharing both with one another and with wider colleagues? And so some of the ways that we can think to examine this issue is to think about participating in the field of science education research, or any research, as a reproduction of culture. So we're reproducing the culture of our community. And so questions that we may have are, to what degree are science education researchers from local contexts able to participate in global communities? And what forms of capital are valued by the science education community that's necessary for that type of participation at the global level? And so when we talk about production of science education practices, we mean engaging in research and disseminating our findings, both at conferences and publications. And so I'm interested in trying to understand who gets to be a central participant and who is maybe relegated to a peripheral participant, and why. So one of the lenses that I can use is language. Language is important for being a central participant in this larger network because we're focusing on English in these communities. In the local context, we may speak other languages, but in our international context, both in the conferences and in these journal publications, book publications, the capital that's most valued is English language proficiency. And so one of the ways that we can think about this is, how do we navigate networks? And network participation is dependent upon what type of capital different individuals and collectives have access to and that are valued. So in this work, we've drawn a lot from Jan Nesper's networks of practice. And we try to think about our analysis for looking at language as the lens in this network. And we're drawing from Katru's concentric circle model of world Englishes. Here we have Katru talked about how world English, there's both an inner circle where native speakers of English are, countries that are represented by UK, Ireland, Australia, US, etc. There's the outer circle where English is spoken as a post-colonial legacy, so countries like India, Singapore, Nigeria. And then there's the expanding circle. These are countries in which English has no official role and that English is a foreign language. And this is true for many European countries, Asian countries, and Latin American countries. So when we look at English language proficiency as a form of social, cultural, economic, and symbolic capital in the dissemination of our research within this community, we can use this model to analyze who is able to participate centrally and who is maybe more peripheral in these networks. And can begin to think about how power is distributed within these networks. Who's in charge of, for example, a lot of these committees and organizations that have the production network, so the publications. And so we're going to do I'm going to share some analysis from journals. There are currently 14 different science education research journals that are ranked as Scopus or SSCI or other. These are greatly expanded in only maybe 10 or 15 years. Before that, there were about 7 journals that were consistently have a long history, and they were all from native English speaking countries, those inner circle countries. Oops. So I'm doing some analysis here. I took the top 4 journals in terms of their SSCI ranking. And these journals, you don't necessarily need to know the names of them for non-science education communities, but these are the acronyms for the top 4 journals. And when we did an analysis of country representation by only looking at author institutional affiliation, so Sarah and I are both good examples. Our institutional affiliation, mine is Korea, hers is Luxembourg, but we're not natives of those countries. So we can't tell you anything from this analysis about the individual author, but the representation of the institute. And what we found is that in these top journals, the first 2 especially, it's 80 to 83% of all publications were from inner circle countries. And this is 2006 to 2010, when there were not many other journals available. There were only about 7 journals then. These 2 journals are located in the United States. RISE is affiliated with an organization in Australia, and IJSE is European. And so we do see some differences here, maybe as a result of their historical association with different communities. But we see also, when I look more carefully, this looks really exciting, 31%, but it was a special issue. And some of the papers in the special issue had 15 authors. So when we look at participation, we can also think about the order of authorship. And when we do, the lead authors are almost always represented by the inner circle. And many publications with authors from outer and expanding have multiple authors. But the majority of the publications from inner circle were single author, especially in 2006 to 2010, when it was still more common to publish independently rather than as a group. And when we did closer analysis, we found that many of the publications that were attributed to authors in these expanding circles came from only a couple of countries. About 11 different countries represented all of these. And some of those countries had only one institute, and sometimes only one faculty member who was responsible for all of the publications from their country. Now, this is analysis 2011 to 2016. So we can see that there has been a little bit of change in the next 5 years. But in this top journal, they're publishing more papers per year. There are more authors per paper than before. And still, there hasn't been much change. Again, this journal has a lot of invited special topic issues where they invite countries. Like one topic might be, science education in Taiwan. And so there's a lot of articles from that country. So overall, the data shows little change over a 10-year period with regards to inner circle representation. And the majority of publications came from 6 expanding countries that had more than 9 publications: Portugal, Israel, Greece, Turkey, Germany, and Sweden. And some of these are countries where their universities use English as a for instruction. And so it may be more common for them to write in English. When we look here, this is 2015 to 2020. So I've added another layer, and comparing across, we see that this is actually over 10 years. There's been very little change in the number of the percentage of non-inner circle. And when I look at Asian countries, representatives of non-Asian countries is almost 95, 100%, with the exception here, IJSE, again, of special topic issues. So science education in Taiwan, something like that. So we see that in addition, when I analyze the individual papers, most publications from authors in Asian countries included multiple authors. There were very, very few single author contributions. And about 50% of all the publications were really decontextualized. So meaning they didn't use a student sample, or educational context of the local context was not the focus of the research. Instead, the context focused on things like curriculum and assessment methods, or conceptual change research, learning environment research, usually where they were comparing large data sets like PISA or TIMSS data sets with other countries. So even when these colleagues are publishing from local context, we're not learning a lot about what's happening in their local context. So they're not contributing to the global science education understanding of what's happening there. And this is just showing that, and again, in 2010 to 2014, very similar situation. So the research wasn't changing in that time. And I looked specifically at the top journal, and looked at one country where I have a doctoral student. And Indonesia has 320 million people. It's the 5th most populous country in the world. There are 50 million students, 5 million teachers, a huge number of science education programs. And since 1995, there have only been 4 papers published about Indonesia. And actually, when I looked at the other journals, there was just 1 or 2 in each of those. And when we look more carefully, again, they're comparative studies written by someone who is not from an Indonesian institute, nor is Indonesian. And it's just comparing large data sets. Or it's a descriptive study. This one is talking about the local Indonesian science teacher programs, but neither professor was affiliated with the institute in Indonesia. And this is the only paper that was represented by an author from an Indonesian institute, and the content is completely decontextualized from anything we might learn about science education in Indonesia. It's about students' misconceptions of covalent bonds. So we have limited representation from outer and expanding countries in publishing, in the publication of their work, dissemination. And so one of the things I wanted to look at was editorial board representation. So again, who is participating in these networks, and who has the ability to expand networks are the editorial board members. And we can see in these journals that between 2017 and 2022, the journal composition, board composition was mostly maintained of inner circle, mainly inner circle authors. Very few members in outer circle, although the journal JARST has made some expansion. and some in expanding circles. So this means countries where people are not using English as a native language. We have seen expansion in 2017 and then reduction. So maybe as they moved, this can be interpreted that there can be too many international people. So it either has to be from expanding country or outer country. You know, they're just sort of maintaining a sort of status quo of a small amount of people, but not expanding both of them simultaneously. IJSE has the largest editorial board, and there were, out of 26 people, 19 were from European institutions. So this 26%, when I look at it, the vast majority of them were from European institutions. And again, this journal is established as part of the European Science Education Association. So it has a local history and local context. But when we look at institutions in Asian countries, there are only 10 people, and I actually mean people, representing these countries. Some of these people are on multiple boards, such as myself. So, and no one from Indonesia yet. So what are the challenges that are faced by researchers whose first language is not English? So language is obviously a barrier for writing and for presenting and even accessing research. But the majority of publications are in English. And so being able to read and maybe move with ease through a lot of content can be difficult. There are different publishing traditions in different contexts. So the local context for how things are done can be quite different from when you are participating in the international journals. So it can be difficult to navigate. There's limited representation on the boards, both at the organizational level and at the journals, in order to maybe invite or promote people to participate, or to maybe even advocate for more representation from other countries. As an editorial board member, I have seen many times the review comments of my peers, and they often say things like, this research has already been conducted, 20 years ago in the United States. And so that it's being conducted now in a different context is not seen as valuable to the readers of the journal. And especially as I work with students from Korea and from Indonesia, we've had several comments like that. And so this research is found not to be cutting edge, or, we're told we're doing what's it called, replication studies. So findings in new context aren't contributing to the development of knowledge. So those are barriers that are difficult to overcome, especially if you don't have representation or voice in the publishing committee. And so this analysis is just meant to provide some point for thinking about language as a form of capital in this network. And, it's important to recognize that each of these journals has different socio-historical, political, and economic contexts. They're developing just like everywhere. And there are, however, these trends now that's forcing academics to publish in top tier and ranked journals. So it means that more people from non-traditional channels will have to be submitting to these 14 journals. And so there's the possibility for a lot of inequity and disparity in participation. And so we need to, develop more structures to expand opportunities for these scholars so that they can become more central. We need to promote more discourse about the roles and responsibilities that individuals have and that organizations have within these contexts, both locally. So our local institutes, for example, in Korea, the Korean Association of Science Education has a role to play in shaping the global educational context. And one way that we've approached that is by starting our own journal, our own English language journal, and making sure that we have a lot of support for non-native English authors. and that we all need to think more about the value that we gain from learning from each other, and particularly learning from the local context, finding more ways to hear about what's happening, even if it seems, replicative of something that was done previously. It's in a different context, and so there's something that we can learn from each other. There are some ways that we can all participate by holding and attending conferences that you don't normally go to, supporting people to have more local and global exchanges like this one that's been organized by Professor Song, and creating new channels of dissemination like our journal APES. Also authoring to co-author manuscripts with colleagues in other contexts, and individually seeking membership to participate in global organizations and editorial boards, and lobbying for more representation. Some organizations are making more MOUs, memorandums of understanding, between international organizations, and trying to hold meetings in other countries. NARST notably held the summer school in 2017 in Taiwan. And just educating ourselves more about these social networks, and what kind of advocacy we can each play, both for ourselves and our colleagues. Let's see. And I'm just going to end my talk by introducing to you our journal, Asia Pacific Science Education. This is the English language journal of CASE. And this journal was specifically developed to publish research that examines issues related to science teaching and learning in the geographic region of Asia. We also publish research that addresses issues focusing members of the diaspora, so people who are originally from the Asia Pacific region who may be living and working in a different area. The first talk in our second session today was about Korean immigrants in Germany. So, for example, their experiences in science education would fit well for this journal. And we're really proud of the expansion of representation and dissemination that we've been able to meet with our journal. We have some of the first publications in English in science education from countries like Vietnam and Malaysia, Thailand, the Philippines, and these are already quite old, these numbers. They have more than 3,000, more than 12,000 downloads just for one paper. And I think it's because there's so few, and people are interested to learn more about what's happening around the world. And here's an example. We wrote an article, my graduate student and I, Dr. Faisal, on science education in Indonesia, and we had a special issue from each country, any country in the Asia Pacific that wanted to do like a historical review. And this article now actually has more than, I think, 18,000 accesses. The journal also offers executive summaries in native language. And this is a practice that was first done by the Cultural Studies of Science Education, which is a sort of flagship journal of equity, CSSE, and they offer these executive summaries. But what's great about this is it means that when someone is searching for keywords or abstracts, they can find the journal in their native language, the article, and then read it in English. And it provides some context, for searching. So this is my last slide, and I'm just interested to learn more about how you think individuals can get access to these social networks, and how they can appropriate the research once they access those networks. And how do you think beliefs about what's valuable from our studies shape opportunities for people to participate? And what are the implications for teachers when they cannot access research in local language journals? Dr. Wilms may be able to talk about the challenges, especially for Luxembourgish, to be able to read academic work in your native language is really critical, I think. And then finally, what are the implications for global science education research if some voices are never heard? So what are we missing as a community? Okay, that's my talk. And I'll hop out for questions from the audience. Or comments. Or gossip. Please also feel free to put comments in the chat. I see Dr. Kong is with us.
This is a great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, congratulations, huge congratulations on your efforts.
Thank you.
To represent the voices from the Asia Pacific region. Yes.
Yeah.
This is very important work, I think. Yes.
Yeah. We're really committed to it, and our editorial board works really hard. Yes. Some of our articles have 5 or more revisions. Okay. It's painful for all of us. Yes. But our goal is to move people towards publication, not to just reject. Yes. So we have a real commitment to expanding opportunities. Yes. Yeah. And we just got announced that we will be included in ESCI starting January 1st. And of
emerging science.
Yes, emerging SSCI.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Yay.
That's great, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I would like to second the sentiments. Congratulations. I think it's really important work that you're doing, and thank you for sharing with us to give us an idea of what's happening. And I guess I have a question just for discussion purposes. Have you seen social media influence any of this at all, or maybe our awareness globally of what's happening in different areas? I ask because I wonder. I wonder if social media is a way to get the word out more, but I'm not sure. So it's more just a probing question.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. And what I've learned is that different local communities use social media differently and use different platforms. For example, in Vietnam, it's still very common to use Facebook. But in other countries like Korea, almost no young Korean people are using Facebook anymore. You know, it's only Instagram. And so when you think about which members of the community can be, you know, tapped with different forms of social media, even the instant messengers we use, you know, if I want to contact you in Europe, I have to use WhatsApp. My friends in, you know, Japan, it's Line. Here it's Kakao. So I think there's potential a lot for local context sharing, local community sharing, and I certainly see a lot of information, for example, from Professor Song in our Facebook group about the CER, the Center of Educational Research. You know, they post information and we can find out about the conferences that they're having. But if you're not in the community already, it may not be the way to make the broad connections. Yeah. Thank you.
I have a quick question. Thanks for sharing your research and your commitment for APES, the Asian Pacific Center for Science Education. So I'm kind of like curious sometimes, because sometimes like research in non-English speaking like countries are sometimes like marginalized in the international like context. So how does like APES try to manage these issues as a like kind of like both international and local journal in Korea?
Yeah, I think you know, we've maybe all been disappointed attending international conferences when, you know, you feel like your session was put on the last day in the last hour. Both Dr. Wilms and I have been members of the International Committee of NARST, which is the large science education, you know, worldwide institute or organization. And we did analysis and found that, in fact, the time slots are pretty well evenly distributed, but it's the perception maybe that the members had that people don't attend their sessions. And, you know, that they didn't feel that people were interested in research from, you know, especially from some context. And I think that's true also for many of our European neighbors when they're attending, you know, maybe the Australian or American research associations. So I think it's hard to find, with regards to the journal, it's hard to find readership, maybe outside. We're getting our analysis from Brill, which is our publisher, at the end of this week or the end of this month. And we'll see more about who's downloading, where are the downloads coming from. And the last year's data actually showed that there was a lot more coming from, you know, native English speaking countries than the Asia Pacific. So, so I'm not sure if that's because of the way people search, the search engines they use, and using English primarily. But yeah, we still have some challenges for people feeling valued and being valued. And certainly for citations, people are not citing the works as much from our journal because it's maybe not, you know, pertinent to the work they're publishing in these other journals. So that's a problem with regards to impact factors when we're trying to play this game.
Yeah, like so many political like kind of issues are considered for like education or like research and context. So sometimes it can be buried and like less cited by other like countries. So that's the kind of like major agenda for like researchers in non-speaking English like countries, which share very different or diverse like backgrounds and, you know, like their political like aspects in education. So I know that Dr. Wilms and Dr. Martin are really like trying very hard like to advocate like minor, you know, like voices in the academia. And thank you for your commitment and, you know, like your efforts.
Thank you.